the subject itself, when I looked at it, especially the first part which says innovate or perish, I thought this is becoming a joke now, because I know in academia, people who work there are always challenged to publish or perish, and for that it is not a joke. But on further reflection, I realized that it is actually serious. Just a few years back, we almost perished, thanks to the quick thinking of our fellow humans, most of them public servants, who very quickly found and innovated and found a vaccine against the virus, which almost made the whole world perish. So really, this topic is not a joke. The world has survived through innovation. And without it, I think it could have very easily perished. So now I withdraw my doubt about the subject. I'm going to talk about it more seriously. Can someone confirm whether I have shared my screen?
Yes. Yeah.
Very good. So I have not changed any word in the topic, although as I proceed to talk about it, I might divert a little bit. Innovate or perish. I think we really need to take this work of innovating more seriously. And I will be focusing on reinventing Africa's leadership structures for sustainable development. Roughly, that's the plan. I will have to put this into context because Africa did not start today. We may want to look a little bit in the past and in the present so that we can think about the future. As you can see, the terminology is used. They need some discussion, innovation, sustainable development, Africa's leadership structures. I think we may want to ask ourselves, why are we calling for innovation now? And I want in my presentation to emphasize that more than structures, values and mindsets of leadership are the ones that need to be invented and transformed most. And as you know, we are caught up in bureaucratic practices. So we need to discuss how we can combine bureaucratic administration, new public management, and transformational value-based governance. Now with that, we have to match competences and mindsets that can enable us attain sustainable development. And there is the famous debate which I will join, and I hope everyone will join me in this, of whether all these will be done by strong leaders or strong institutions. Now, in terms of context, there has been a search for public administration and governance capacities in Africa, and this search started way back in 1948. Unfortunately, in the context of then, that search was launched for selfish reasons. When you reflect the colonialists, when they combined forces to start designing capacity development programs for strengthening the governance capacity in African countries that had started clamoring for independence, they were not doing it out of love of Africa. They were doing it in preparation for their departure so that after they have departed, they leave behind a system that will facilitate the continuity of them exploiting Africa, and they did it successfully. You would have said, we would think that where Africa became independent, so what is the relevance of this? Unfortunately, it looks like the more things changed, the more they remained the same. Colonialism went, but we have neo-colonialism, and the problem hasn't changed much. At the time of launching capacity development programs in 1948, the world had just left what was called the World War, although basically Africa should have had nothing to do with it. And you would say, okay, the world wars ended, so why are we still hunting for capacity in public administration? Unfortunately, now Africa is engulfed in many internal conflicts. And so the capacities of public administration not only get depleted, they are more and more needed. So the search goes on and on. I think you could look at our search for transformation as something new, or you could go back and understand that the launching of colonial administration in Africa was itself a big transformation. But transformation is not a neutral terminology. You can transform something negatively, or you can transform something positively. So the launching of the colonial administration, the bureaucratic administration as we know it, was highly transformational, but in a very disruptive way. And that way, that one was really not introduced, as I have said, to do a favor to Africa. It was to exploit Africa. Now, one of the ironies in African countries is that the very public administration model that was used to exploit Africa is the exact one that we adopted at independence, and we never even bothered to change it. We never bothered to say, this is the instrument that was used to colonize us effectively, to exploit us, to exploit our resources. We should now change it so that we have an instrument that will enable us to manage ourselves. We didn't do that. On the contrary, we worked very hard to strengthen that bureaucratic public administration. I think that was a historical blunder, and we are still struggling to see whether we can find a governance system that will enable us to govern ourselves in our own interest. It is in this context that now we are discussing how to innovate and how to reinvent our leadership structures that can enable us to achieve sustainable development. I think that our discussion may be more meaningful if we bear this context in mind. Now, I know many people were happy that that we got independence, but I think independence was a very big missed opportunity. At independence, what would have been correct would have been to say, you the colonialist, you brought an administrative system, a governance system, you used it effectively and subjugated us and exploited us. Now that you go with your system, we will design ours that will make ourselves money. It didn't happen. In the search of what can be done, many countries had military coups. There are not many African countries that survived military coups. All that was in search of an appropriate African way of governing ourselves. Now, in the confusion, the same colonialists who had imposed the bureaucratic public administration on us said, this thing isn't working as we thought it would work. We have now a new one, and it is called the new public management. Because you people, you are not managing yourselves efficiently. If you adopt new public management, then maybe you will manage yourself efficiently. But again, this was a selfish model. A selfish model that sought to make African governments, African societies, govern themselves in such a way that their partners in the former colonial administrations do not get disadvantaged. They were seeking only one thing, efficiency. Now, efficiency is a value that sounds romantic in management, but when you come deep to think about it deeply, it's an inward-looking value. It does not look outside to see the people that are being served. Not surprising. The colonialist was never bothered about the people that were being served. And so efficiency was good for them to look inside governments rather than looking outside to see how governments were serving the people. And so, as I said, even in the 1990s, with the electoral democratization, things didn't very much improve. And so we are still looking. I hope in this discussion we will have some contributions. I think there is another missed opportunity which African scholars, especially and researchers, need to consider. And this is the diversity of Africa. Basically, diversity is supposed to be something to value. It is supposed to be part of the richness, part of the wealth of Africa that can be harnessed and exploited for Africa's progress and development. But as it turns out, that's not what happened. Again, the colonial administration had convinced Africans that we are so different that because of this difference, we need to tolerate each other. Why they never told us that you are so different and this difference constitutes part of your richness and therefore you need to love it and harness it for your development? I think we can now start asking them. But it was a missed opportunity and we don't need to keep on missing it. We need to convince ourselves that diversity of Africa, and Africa is a continent of diversity. I hope it's going to become soon a country. It's a country of diversity, and that diversity is part of its wealth. It needs to be cherished. It needs to be valued. It needs to be harnessed. Now, in order to do this, we have to understand it. Most researchers tend to write as if Africa is one homogeneous entity. We know that it is not true. It is not true linguistically. It is not true politically. It is not true religiously. It is not true geographically. It is not true ethnically. So why do you always talk about it as if Africa is one homogeneous entity? Again, we have been afraid to acknowledge, recognize, and value our diversity. Instead, our diversity has been used to destroy Africa in many respects. Different religions fighting each other, different tribes fighting each other, different countries fighting each other. It's not necessary. If only we understood that this diversity is part of the richness of Africa, we need to harness it for development. We don't need to tolerate each other, we need to love each other. The word tolerance belongs to the paradigm of hatred. If I hate you, I can tolerate you depending on whether I fear the laws that may catch up with me if I kill you. Then I tolerate you. So we shouldn't romanticize the word tolerance. It's a wrong word in the African context. We are supposed to love each other. Within our differences, if we recognize that these differences are part of our riches, then we love each other. When someone from Salt University said, "Can you talk to us?" I didn't say, "Why should I talk to Ghanaians?" No, I jumped up with pleasure and said, "Yeah, I'm going to talk to Africans because I love Africans." If I was to emphasize the difference between Ghanaians and Ugandans, I probably have said no, all accepted reluctantly. So again, another missed opportunity that should not keep on missing is this diversity, and researchers need to take up this. I want now to turn to the source, the current source of emphasis on transformation. I was not consulted when the topic that I'm talking about was proposed, but the good thing is I like it because of this terminology, transformation. Where does it come from? Beginning with the United Nations Agenda for Sustainable Development, the 2023 agenda, it says that it is an ambitious and transformational vision for the whole world. So it puts emphasis on transformation. If you look at the Africa 2063 agenda, it is called a strategic framework for the socioeconomic transformation of the continent. Again, it is transformation. And that is not copied from the UN. On the contrary, maybe the UN copied the 2063 strategy because the 2063 strategy was made in 2015 around January, February, while the 23rd agenda was made in September. So it is not this time, it is not Africa copying the world. Maybe it could be the other way around. If you look at the 2050 East African Community Vision, it wants to make East Africa transformed into an upper and middle income region within a secure and politically united East Africa. If you look at Uganda, I'm using the examples I know. If you look at Uganda's Vision 2040, it looks at a transformed Ugandan society from a peasant to a modern and prosperous country within 30 years. And I have looked at Ghana's strategic program. It says the purpose is transformation. So we should not take this word transformation lightly, because since the end of the 1970s, the world has been pushed to reform. Now, reform was very good because the push was new public management with the public management value of efficiency. But what has it given to the world, reforms? Reforming means you make things better, slightly better. But if you really want a drastic change, you don't reform, you transform. And therefore, you cannot transform using old methods. That's what brings innovation in the picture. You cannot transform using old methods. You have got to apply innovative ideas, innovative creativity, innovative methods if you have to aim at transforming a society. So again, I'm not dreaming about the word transformation. I just picked it from all these strategies that are driving our countries, right from the global up to the national. And so we zero in on public on innovation. And let me tell you why I feel qualified to talk to you about innovation. For 22 years, actually not 22, around 20, since 2003, up to 2022, I was supervising the United Nations Public Service Awards program, and that's a program through which the United Nations promotes innovations in public sector institutions. So that gave me a chance to have a closer look at innovations in public sector institutions all over the world. Since I retired, I have been chairing the African Association for Public Administration Management Innovative Award. This is an award that is competed for by public sector innovations in different African countries. Now, this has given me a chance to look more closely at what is happening in public sector institutions in terms of innovation in Africa. And then I'm also chairing the UCLG Africa Local Africa Public Service Awards, which now gives me a chance to see what is happening in local governments in Africa in terms of innovations. And so when I talk about innovations, I'm not just thinking, I'm just reflecting on what I have seen. So when we say innovation, we are talking of some novelty, something new, unique, but not just new and unique, but very relevant to the development needs in the context. Something that is new, relevant, and that has had a significant positive impact on society's development. Something that can be adaptable or replicated in other circumstances, and something that is sustainable, not the one that comes today and dies tomorrow. These are the yardsticks that we have been using, both at international level, at regional level, and at local level, to say, yes, this is an innovation that can contribute to development. I wanted to bring out this into this discussion. And what did we learn about innovation through all this experience spanning more than 20 years? Some of the things will contradict what probably many Africans think. The first thing that we confirmed is that actually public sector innovates. Since from the 1970s, there was an assault on public sector institutions, on public services, that those are sluggish institutions, they are not creative, they are lazy, they are engaged in red tape, they don't innovate. That is not true. Public sector institutions innovate. In fact, the recent calamity we almost faced of COVID proved beyond doubt that public servants actually do innovate constantly. Poor countries actually innovate, contrary to what many people think. In actual fact, poverty is a big motivator for innovation. But of course, rich people can't understand this. They never ask themselves, how do poor people survive? Poor people survive their poverty through creativity and innovation. African countries do innovate. I've seen, for example, Ghana has been winning the United Nations Public Service Awards. Cameroon, Morocco, Egypt, Senegal, Zambia, South Africa, Namibia. Almost every country you mentioned in Africa has at one point or another won the United Nations Public Service Awards, meaning that public servants in that country do innovate. So it is not true that African countries do not innovate. The third thing, the fourth one is that innovation breeds innovation. It's like a habit. Once you make your public sector institution, you start innovating, they never stop. It becomes a habit. Innovation breeds innovation. So besides this, which we have confirmed, we have also seen what exactly are the drivers of innovation. The first one is effective transformational service-driven leadership. It's good we are talking about reinventing our leadership structures for sustainable development. It's good because effective transformational service-driven leadership is one of the drivers, one of the strongest drivers of innovation. Community engagement and empowerment is a driver of innovation. You see, bureaucratic public administration makes us think that innovators are those who close themselves in their offices and think great and come out with the innovation. No, that's not true. The more you engage with the people, the more you get good ideas, and most likely you are likely to stumble on an innovation. So engaging community and empowering it is one of the drivers of innovation. Collaboration and partnerships, they drive innovation because you learn through collaboration and through partnerships, but not just any collaboration and not just any partnerships. Through history, African countries have been working in collaboration and partnerships with development partners. Unfortunately, some of these development partners are actually exploiters. So what you need to avoid, even if collaboration and partnerships are drivers of innovation, what you need to avoid is exploitative collaboration or exploitative partnerships. Unfortunately, in the context of Africa, this is happening very much. Capacity building, working in teams, harnessing diversity, as I've just said, all these are drivers of innovation. Future orientation and long-term thinking is probably the strongest of all of them. You cannot innovate if you are not thinking of tomorrow, because today is too late. You cannot innovate for today. That's finished. It's just 24 hours. Innovation requires to be put in the context of long-term thinking, strategic thinking. And then lastly, monitoring and evaluation, measuring change and impact. That sustains innovation. So this we have learned. And if someone was to say, so how do you encourage African public sector institutions, African leadership to innovate? Then you would explore these practices. But first, one would have to do away with the biases that say public sector does not innovate, poor countries do not innovate, African countries can't innovate. No, first of all, you have to do away with those biases. And then you can think of what drives innovation. The other terminology we have to understand is sustainable development. It's not as obvious as it sounds. The most frequently quoted definition is from our Common Future. It's the United Nations report, Commission for Sustainable Development, 1987. I had not even thought of joining the UN. But it is that report that created the meeting point between social, economic, and environmental solutions. And in that report, sustainable development was defined as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And that can be taken as the official definition of the United Nations for Sustainable Development. Unfortunately, despite all the years I spent in the UN, I don't agree with it entirely. Why don't I agree with it? My question is the responsibility of today's generation to avoid compromising the future generations in order to meet their needs today? My view is that the responsibility of the generation of today is to address the problems of the generation of tomorrow, which comes as a consequence of the actions of today's leadership. Now, my understanding of leadership is that leadership is not about sorting out the problems of today. It is about sorting out the problems of tomorrow. Because the problems of today, you are just in problems. Probably you will not sort them out, they are just of today. But if you have to be seen as an effective leader, you should be able to solve the problems of tomorrow, because today is too late. And therefore, I thought there should be a readjustment in the definition of sustainable development to put to task the leadership and people of today to make sure that they solve the problems of the future. They don't leave problems for future generations. I mean, in clear terms, if you construct a good school today, if you put in place a good schooling system today, you are not solving the problem of today, you are solving the problems of tomorrow. If you put in place a very good healthcare system, with very good clinics, hospitals, medicine, that's not a solution today, that's a solution to tomorrow. If you put a road that is going to last 50 years, that's not a solution for today. That's a solution for 50 years to come. Therefore, sustainable development is not about the solutions of today. It's about the solutions of tomorrow. I know when you are caught in give us our daily bread, that concept becomes difficult. But to give us our daily bread is a very bad player. It's not a good player. It's not strategic. You cannot develop by getting your daily bread. But if you can create the bread for tomorrow, then the people of tomorrow will not spend energy creating bread. They will spend energy creating bigger things than bread. Now I want to cross to the main meat of the presentation, which has to do with leadership structures. I have to confess that when I was thinking about this, I had a big problem, and I will tell you the origin of this problem. Most of the reforms that have been being imposed and implemented in Africa have been structuralist. No, they find an economic problem, they say you privatize. They find a political problem, they say you decentralize. No, those are structuralist solutions. And their success has been nuanced precisely because they were basically structuralist. And so the question I was asking myself was, is the leadership problem in Africa structuralist, such that we pay attention to reinventing the leadership structures? I know in organizational management, there is room for structures. If you don't have structures, it's very difficult to coordinate, it's very difficult to command, it's very difficult to communicate. But I would want to propose, and propose very strongly, that the leadership problem that we have in many African countries has to do with leadership values. We can go ahead and create structures that look beautiful, but if these structures are not put in a context of appropriate values and principles of good governance or effective governance, then they will be empty shells. And this is what we have been seeing in history. And so I would say, yes, let's pay attention to Africa's leadership structures, but most importantly, let's pay attention to the values that will push these structures to work for sustainable development. Now, the good thing is that we have a beginning point. We are not thinking from scratch, because the leaders who have been putting together these strategies, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the Africa 2063 strategy, all these vision and plans at regional and national and community levels, they don't emphasize very much the values, but the values they put there. If you read the documents of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, you will pick out the values, which the leaders who put together that document was saying, unless these values are promoted, nothing else will work, meaning even the Sustainable Development Goals will not be achieved. The first one is the notion of transformation. It's like they were saying, we have tried to reform, things have not worked, now we have to transform. Integration, leaving no one behind, effectiveness, people focus and inclusion, accountability, self-reliance and resilience, equity and equality, peace, safety and security, and respect for diversity. I wish they had not used the term respect, they had used valuing diversity. In other words, whatever structures, whatever leadership structures we have in place, whether you are talking of Africa at continental level, or whether you are talking of Africa at regional level, like the East African community, which has got the ambition of becoming one federated country, or whether you are talking of Ghana as a country, whatever structures you put in place for leadership, if they are not within the context of these values, those structures will still produce very mediocre results. Actually, mediocre is not the term, catastrophic, because that's what has been happening. The leadership crisis in Africa is a value leadership crisis, not a structure leadership crisis. That's how I would argue about this. And if you look at the 2063 strategy, you will pick the same value. There is no contradiction. The only area where they contradict is that the 2030 agenda was saying there has to be partnerships, you have to contribute money, you have to support the Africa strategy and NEPAD program, and the Africa 2063 strategy is saying we want self-reliance. Africa must develop using its own resources. That's when we will be resilient. It's the only contradiction that I see. But the rest of the values that are promoted, it seems there is a convergence of voice, that there is a value crisis, and we need now to emphasize values. And one of the most I think one of the most critical values that we need to take into consideration all the time is the value of equity. Equity in all its dimensions: social equity, economic equity, intergenerational equity, and ecological equity. When you look at all the problems Africa is caught up with, especially the conflicts, the violent conflicts, they are around this issue of equity. When people feel they are not having their share, they will come up and cause insecurity. The leadership structures and values combined together, they need to be around these four areas: mission-driven strategic leadership, anticipatory planning, I call it scientific prophecy. I've already said leadership is about the future, not the current thing. Results and value-based accountabilities, and integrated leadership systems. Why am I talking about integrated leadership systems? I'm talking about this because in many African countries, when we talk about leadership, people jump at who is the president, who is the prime minister, who is the minister, who is the parliamentarian, and that's it. No. If you have to have a leadership that is going to transform a country, it must permeate across the entire society. Literally, each person must see themselves as leaders. Because you cannot count on only one man as the president to develop a whole country. How strong is that person? It's not possible. Leadership must permeate decentralized structures, community-level structures, civil society organizations, community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, all these leaders have got to have some mission-driven strategic leadership. And there needs to be an agreement on where each of them is leading. This is not what is happening. Even when a country has decentralized, you find people are just looking at who is the chairman of this district. That cannot produce a mass of leaders to transform a country. So, nevertheless, we are caught in a situation which we inherited from colonialism, and we have got to deal with it. This is how I think we are going to deal with it. Now, I know that the view has been that we move away from bureaucratic public administration, and in any case, new public management failed us. The reforms didn't succeed. Therefore, we go to governance. I'm saying that is very wrong. Yes, the highly centralized traditional public administration bureaucracies were imposed on us. Actually, I suspect we carelessly adopted them. We didn't want to think. The new public management with values of efficiency was imposed on us. But now we have a chance to look at, since now we know these two have got deficiencies, what do we put in place? This time ourselves, before someone imposes something again on us. And this is what I think should be done. One, we cannot throw away traditional public administration bureaucracy. We simply cannot, unless we want to remain in chaos. You cannot be agitating for rule of law, professionalism, and ethics in public administration, and then at the same time you say we do away with bureaucracy. No. Bureaucracy is a set of rules that guide the management of society. So you cannot do away with it. What you need to do is to make sure that the laws are the good ones and the laws are implemented. The problem has been that instead of saying we do not have the capacity to implement the laws that we have, someone was saying you need to reduce the laws. But that was not the problem. The problem was not that the laws were too many. The problems were that we didn't have the capacity to implement whatever laws we had, whether they are many or few. But the reality is, you cannot say we want to govern well, we want professionalism in public sector institutions, we want rule of law, we want democracy, but we don't want bureaucracy. That can't happen. It's a wrong solution. We cannot do away with the new public management because it is the cornerstone of professionalism, accountability, and efficiency. The only problem with it is that it looks inside the organization and not outside. But every organization requires efficient operations. Every organization requires professional work. Every organization requires accountability. So we cannot do without it. So what we need to do is to find a meeting point between public administration, which we need for rule of law, public management, which we need for efficient operations, and value-based and results-oriented public governance. The difference is that this time we will be paying attention to values in addition to efficiencies and in addition to rule of law. We will be paying to values of equity, of participation, of integrity, of inclusion. We will have that to build a system that put all these three together. That's how we will create leadership structures that pay attention to sustainable development. By sustainable development, it means it will pay attention to social aspects, economic aspects, and environmental aspects. And what leadership will that be? This is what I propose. That's my model for a leadership in the context of pursuing sustainable development. I cannot go through each of these. If you read downwards, you will read the word leadership. If I wanted to talk about each of these, then we wouldn't live here. But I'm going to just pick a few. The first one, the L, is you leverage the community potential for innovative transformation and sustained development. You see, when the colonialists came to Africa, they came with the mentality of superiority. They had an agenda, they had a way of doing it, and they had to do it. The people had nothing to do with it. They had to be subjects of what the white man had brought. Must we do the same? No. We must know that the people themselves have got problems, and they have an idea of where those problems came from, and they have some ideas of how those problems can be solved. So if you want to lead in the context of pursuing sustainable development, you have got to leverage the potential of the people to develop themselves. In other words, the answer to the question, who develops a country, is not the president or prime minister. No, it's the people. The people develop a country. The leaders, they can mobilize, they can organize, they can inspire, they can motivate, but they can't develop a country. The people themselves must be mobilized to develop their country. That's where that L comes from. You have to leverage the potential of the community you lead for innovation, transformation, and sustained development. Now, you may think that I am dreaming, but they are examples which show that this works. I don't know whether we have someone from Kenya here, and there is a practice. There used to be, and that practice is still there. It's called Harambe. That started.
Yes, Prof.
Yes, Harambe
Yes.
started in the old times, but it came from this, realizing that the people themselves can actually figure out how to help themselves. In Tanzania,
Yes, Prof.
What were they calling? The African socialism, which many people were criticizing the late Nyerere for, and the villagization, that was trying to exploit the people for their own development. If you recall the efforts of the late Thomas Sankara, he almost changed the whole country in just 5 years by mobilizing the people to develop themselves. So this is not Kayusia dreaming. I just observed what I have seen in countries, because I've been advising African countries and I've been answering the question, why is there success in some and not in others? And I have seen one of the factors is the leadership that mobilizes communities to develop themselves, they register results more quickly. Rwanda here, a few years back, we had thought there should be no country called Rwanda. Now it is one of the most effective states in terms of the way it is organized, in terms of the way the people themselves engage in sorting out their problems. So if we have to think of reinvigorating leadership structures, we have got to accept first and foremost that it's not the leaders who develop countries, it's the people who do. Now you figure out how to engage the people. I'm going to talk about the next one, the last one actually. Let me talk about the pursuing a vision for the future generations that is built on the achievements of today. At the risk of repeating myself, I already said that leadership is not about today, it is about tomorrow. The tendency now is for people to say, this leader has a vision. when you come to think about it, what kind of leader is this? What kind of leader has got a vision for the whole country? A vision in education, a vision in agriculture, a vision in infrastructure, a vision in health, a vision in environment. How possible is that? So rather that's a political statement that he has a vision, give him votes or support him. Okay, I accept that. But when you ask yourself, how does this vision come about? How is it solidified into a plan that people can say, this we are going to implement? One man or one woman cannot do it. So it takes us back to leveraging the community potential. You have got to engage the people so that eventually the whole country says, yes, this is our vision. You lead, we will follow. But to think that one man has got a vision that will develop a country, no, that's not possible. In my view, it is in fact arrogance for one person to think that you can think for 45 million people in terms of their health, education, agriculture, environment, roads, railways, airplane. What kind of thinking machine are you? It's not possible. But if you figure out how to bring all of them together and say, how do we develop this country? They will tell you, and then you will agree on that vision. So the L at the beginning and the P at the end are directly linked. This business of saying, let's get a man with a vision, I would drop it. Now, you cannot be that kind of leader unless you have got a mindset and competences that are matched. Again, this is linked with what I had said about values, that what we may take as a leadership crisis in Africa is not a crisis of structure, it's a crisis of values. And I can reduce it up to a crisis of competences and mentalities. Now, you look at this diagram, again, I cannot touch on each element. It is going to be too much for us. But very quickly, let me tell you how my thinking is connected around this. We need competencies to do things. Some of them are administrative, some of them are operational, some of them are integrative, and others are entrepreneurial. But these competencies, they cannot be operationalized unless people have got the correct mentality. For example, you can be a well-trained administrator, you have administrative competence. And if that compliance with laws and regulations, and it will enhance professionalism, ethics, integrity, and rule of law. That's why administrative competence is needed. But that administrative competence, if you give it to someone who does not believe in law and order, that administrative competence is going to be very dangerous. To have this administrative competence lead enhancing professional, you need people who have the mentality of believing in law and order, the mentality of controlled power and authority. If you have people whose mentality is dictatorial, and then you give them administrative powers, you have created terrible dictators, as we have seen them on the African continent. I know we always think of the dictators, you know, the ones who are presidents, but when you have got a dictatorial regime, that dictatorship permeates across all public officials. Same thing with operational, for example. Operational means like if you're a doctor, you really need to have competence to be a doctor. If you are a nurse, same thing. If you are an engineer, same thing. But if you have that competence and you don't believe in service, you don't believe in care for the people, you're concerned who and the vote, then that competence cannot be used very well. Again, it means your competence is not matched with the correct mentality. So to go back to my original argument, crisis of leadership is not structural. This is where it is. Some people are in leadership positions when actually, so they don't serve them. Instead, they exploit them, just like the colonialists had done. In case you think the colonialists went completely, I think they left some good representatives behind. So, all that, who is going to do it? I think I have talked about two missed things. What we need to transform things. Instead, we just continued with what was left. I talked about missing, exploiting our diversity for our own wealth. Relationship between institutions and strong leaders. I think President Obama of USA was now, me, when I think about it critically, I find it highly misleading. And I wish someone had jumped at it very quickly and said, no, you cannot mislead it. The strength of public leadership lies mainly in two things. People-centered achievements. If you're a leader and your achievements are people-centered, we say you are strong. But also, it lies in trust of the people. If the people trust you and you don't abuse that trust, then we say you are strong. And these two are mutually reinforcing. Strong men and strong women create institutions which then guide the country's development. I think what we need to realize is that only strong leaders object themselves to the dictates, to the control of the governance institutions they create. The unfortunate thing in many African countries is that leaders create institutions and then refuse to subject themselves to the control of these institutions, and then the institutions collapse. So one thing I want to emphasize is that there is a symbiotic relationship between leaders and institutions, whereby leaders create institutions and then institutions guide the leaders. You cannot say that we don't need strong leaders, we need strong institutions. You cannot have strong institutions if they are managed by very weak leaders, because these two go together. If I wanted, I would give you examples of leaders who created institutions and then refused to abide by them. There are many. Now, that is not a sign of strength. I think what Obama was talking about was not strength. He was mistaking brutality for strength. Brutality is not strength. So one of the problems in Africa has been that strong men and strong women, they liberate countries, create institutions, but they are not strong enough to subject themselves to the control of these institutions. And we should not miss this point and start running after strong institutions, thinking that we will get them with weak men and weak women. It's not possible. All we have to do is to define what is a strong leader. If we continue mistaking brutality for strength, then irrespective of what structures we put in place, we will stay in the leadership quagmire that we have seen around. So what can I conclude out of this lesson? I think now we have to undertake another transformation, this time by ourselves. We should have learned a very big lesson from the colonial administrators as they left. And that lesson was that actually Africa is transformable. Because they came, they found an Africa and they transformed it. So which means if we ourselves determine that we will transform it, we will transform it. And we cannot thank the colonialists for having transformed because they came to do that. And they succeeded. Now, if we fail to transform it, we cannot turn around and blame them. It means we are not strong enough to transform Africa. And we cannot say Africa is not transformable because there is already proof that Africa is actually transformable. We did not learn this, and consequently, we remained with colonized minds. I think we need to decolonize our minds now. So in order to achieve Africa's transformational ambitions, innovation should be the key. And in transforming Africa's governance, the appropriate mix of bureaucratic administration, new public management, and value-based transformation must be found. And public administration and pick new public management, or discard that one and pick the other. No, we have got to find a mix of these three that fits the circumstances of sustainable development that we are pursuing. And the very first priority in reinventing Africa's leadership structures is societal and public management values, as well as leadership and followership. Because the structuralist approaches used for reforms in the past did not yield much, not even the efficiency they sought to yield. The symbiotic relationship between strong leaders and strong institutions must be prominently advocated for to erase the wrong impression that institutions can be managed by weak leaders. And reinvented leadership structures must take into account the involvement and participation of the people. My view, and this is what I have seen, no people is so weak that it cannot develop themselves. So the leadership structures that we are thinking about must be capable of leveraging the potential of the people to develop themselves. I thank you very much for listening to me. I take it as a privilege indeed to have been given this opportunity. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so very much, Professor and Doctor. You see, I'm automatically calling you Professor now that we've listened to you. This has been a very rich, I mean, you've given us so much food for thought and very stimulating in terms of all the information. And, you know, we need time and probably we would want your presentation to digest it properly and so on. Thank you so much. Look, I encourage the people to put up their questions during the chat. And I think we have a number of questions over there. And before we go on, I just want to tell you some of the things that I heard you say. You said transformation should be long-term and not necessarily reformation. We have to value diversity in Africa. We must infuse our structures with values. Leadership must be visionary. These are the things that I was getting from your talk. Sustainable development must address the problems of tomorrow, and that if they address problems of today, it will be too late. We need to think about how we need to let go of the notion of one man or one woman developing a nation. It's impossible. It should be an integrated effort with all the stakeholders involved. There's a crisis of competence and mentality or mindsets, and that I couldn't agree with you more, Doctor. And your last point about strong leaders creating the strong institutions and being strong enough to subject themselves to the institutions that they create, that is a very, very strong and interesting point that you raised. And now, without further ado, I would go to the questions that are on the chat. And then I would like to ask all my friends and colleagues, all of you, if you have any questions, please raise your hand using the icon, and then you would have your chance. But before that, it was just an incredibly interesting presentation, and I'm sure all of the participants here agree with me. Dr. Aruzia, one person is asking, how can we mainstream innovation in public sector? How can we mainstream innovation in public sector? And how to make the innovation visible to all? That is one question. Can I ask anybody else who is not speaking to please mute their microphone?
I don't think I got how can we streamline
okay, how can we mainstream, and this was a question from Samuel Mwaura. He says, how can we mainstream innovation in public sector and how to make the innovation visible to all? Did you get me?
Yeah, I got it. Mainstreaming innovation in public sector, right?
Yes. And how to make it visible to everyone.
Let me first give you an example, or rather examples, of countries which have succeeded in mainstreaming innovation in the public sector. I don't know whether some of you have heard of the Center for Public Service Innovation in South Africa. In South Africa, they have a Center for Public Service Innovation, CPSI. Yes. And it is mandated to spearhead innovation in public sector institutions. Among the things it does is to mount competitions for innovations. In fact, I have seen even its work at continental level. Now, the innovations that come through that competition are promoted to be implemented in public sector organizations. Some of them have won the United Nations Public Service Award. Some of them have won the UPAM Award. But most importantly, most of them have been implemented in different public sector institutions in Africa. So that means South Africa has institutionalized innovation in the public sector. Someone might say it is expensive, but who says development is cheap? Development is not cheap. You have got to be ready to spend some resources to make people think. And most importantly, you have got to be ready to spend some resources which will come up with some solutions which will not work. If you go along the way promoting innovations, you have got to accept that sometimes people creatively come up with solutions And in the process of coming up with solutions, money is spent, but the solutions don't work. If now you go saying, no, the solutions you came up with didn't work, so we are cutting your budget, then you are not promoting innovation. You have got to accept that the process of innovation is cumbersome. It might look wasteful, but it is the surest way of doing it. That's an example from South Africa. The second one is from Kenya. In Kenya, they have got what they call Huduma. I think Huduma is a service. If there is a Kenyan, help me, so that I don't tell a lie. But with a public service-wide organization that is mandated to come up with the best ways of serving the Kenyan people. And I have had a chance of interacting with Huduma. It's unbelievable. But again, it's like the Center for Public Service Innovation. Some things they come up with don't work, they discard them. Some they come up with, they work, and then they promote them. Countrywide. So that's rationalizing innovation. But then there is a management practice that promotes innovation, which I pointed out. Like if you put people in a team to say, can you think about this problem and come up with a solution? That teamwork is most likely to come up with. But then you have got to be the kind of manager that trusts teams, not the kind of manager that thinks that what you have thought is the best way and no one should contradict it. And it is not an innovation. Maybe we can call it an invention, but an innovation must be implemented and seen to work. And then you know that that's an innovation. It has served people, they are happy.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kawusia. There are so many questions for you, and perhaps I would give you maybe 2 at a time so that you can mull on them. Marcel Pognon is asking concerning, thank you so much for that answer, Dr. Kawusia. Here is another question for you. Marcel Pognon says, concerning the characteristics that have driven. Oh, hello.
You had frozen. I didn't get the question.
Okay. Okay. The question is concerning the characteristics that drive innovation that you mentioned. You mentioned monitoring and evaluation. He says, who will be responsible for the monitoring, evaluation, and assessment, considering the fact that African leaders are corrupt?
Oh, I was trying to avoid the word corruption. Okay, so we can go with what we know to be the correct practice, and then we get the deviation from that. What we know to be the correct practice is that sustained monitoring and evaluation is a process of discovering what may work and what may not work and correcting it before a lot of money is wasted. That is incontestable, right? But in the process of operating it, you can get people doing it wrongly, including corrupt people. So, but the fact that they are corrupt people does not mean that you drop monitoring and evaluation as a mechanism for promoting how to find what is going wrong and how to find how to correct it and how to find new ways of doing better. That's the process of monitoring and evaluation. So let us separate these two programs. First, there is that, and then second, there is the bad behavior of corrupt people.
Thank you for that answer. Here is another one for you. It says by Moses Kamara.
Which is now a different question. Concerning corrupt leaders, I think we may create room for asking ourselves where these leaders come from.
Okay. That's always an interesting question.
We are not altogether innocent. Some of us are not even bothered about it. Some of us even promote it. I have one of my research topics is corruption. Even for my PhD, way back in 1992, I had to deal with corruption. And I have got very strong views about the corruption. The tendency is that corruption is an issue of bad apples who take up leadership positions and then exploit. But you need to ask yourself where the bad apples come from. I think corruption is a societal problem, not just an individual's problem. Because after all, are there no murderers in society? They are there. But no, people don't love murderers. Now, they are corrupt people in society, but unfortunately, they are acceptable. In many societies, you just say, how does this man survive? On Sunday, he's in church, and in the evening, he's on TV. They are saying he stole so much money. And no one is bothered, not even his wife and kids. Haven't you seen these things? So it's not really an issue of individuals. It is an issue of society. This is why my approach was to say, think about the values. What values are in this society which glorifies someone who has stolen public money? Because I've seen them being glorified. In fact, I have seen people who don't steal public money being called cowards. Why did you even go to school? Your fellow Ugandans are doing well. You went to school together. Why are you like this? And for them, they are like that. You know, this kind of thing.
Thank you, Dr. Kauzia. I have another question for you from Moses Kamara. He says, how do we solve the problems of parallel and weak institutions? And that is one. And then Professor Rose Namara says, the leadership problem in Africa is lack of strategies. The few we have tend to hide their strategies, work alone, possibly do not document their thinking, and die with their thinking. Do we need strategists? That is the question. Did you hear me, Dr. Kauzia?
I think this requires deep thinking. Deep thinking in what is a weak institution? I think institutions are seen to be weak or strong depending on people who work in them. Let's get an institution like a parliament, whether it is in Uganda or Ghana or Kenya or Zambia. These are countries that inherited the structure of parliament from the colonialists, not so?
Yes.
How come the same structure of parliament is working in one country and not in another? What's the difference? If you look at the way they are structured in terms of rules of procedure, committees, and all this, it's the same. But how come someone... I will tell you why I started emphasizing this issue of the people. When I initiated into the court, I reported that that there was no problem in the institution. It was the management. And then the management disowned the report. It took me a very long meeting to discuss with the board and say, this management, by discarding this report, is just emphasizing what I've just said. instead of picking this report and working on it to make things better, they had people. And from there onwards, every time I go into an organization to study it, I know consultants tend to study structures and all this. I always look at the people. Because even what you would think are weak structures, you find there are people who use them to get good results. So what does a weak institution look like? Well, maybe you can analyze the people who are working in those institutions. So if we want to choose with the people, deal with the people that are up to the point of who appointed the weak people. The parallel institutions, that can be, again, a structural problem, but it comes from someone who didn't see that you cannot create parallel institutions because they will sooner or later collide. Lack of strategists. My view about a strategist in terms of organizations and institutions, including government, that you have one man who has a strategy and is going to make people implement that strategy. No. My view is that you have one man or one woman who mobilizes the people he's leading, and they all together come up with a strategy and with commitment to implement it. So again, we go back to this one-man show. If you count on one man, then the risk you have is that he will die with the strategy he had in the head. Or he might be the type of man who doesn't want to tell you what he wants. You say, we will not take this as a strategy of a ministry if we don't have evidence that it came from the people working there. For example, in the Constitution of South Africa, a mayor cannot have a strategy of that town or that city approved if there is no evidence that that strategy was designed in collaboration, in participation with the people of that city. So they went up to the point of putting it in the law. But to count on one man, you really need to realize that we have limitations as people. Me as an individual, I cannot be leading an organization and pretend that I know human resources management, financial management, operations management, facilities management, all these. No, I need a team that puts together all these, and then we design a strategy together.
Wow. Dr. Kayuzia, thank you so much for that response. The more you talk, the more you give us meat to digest, the more you give us food for thought. And let me put in my own question, which is the whole issue about changing or transformation of mindsets. I mean, what is a tried and tested way of transforming mindsets? Because it obviously is not something you do from one day to the next. It has to be an ongoing process for it, and you may not see results tomorrow, maybe you see results much later. What are your thoughts on how to change mindsets? Because I also agree with you that it's one of our biggest problems and challenges in Africa.
First, you are right to say it can't happen one day, because most of these mindsets are developed over a year. I think changing my mindset has to do with ways of doing. Examples, if you are a leader and you
Dr. Kauzia, your internet is very unstable. Can I suggest you take off your image and then just speak until we can get you? Hello?
it had disconnected.
Oh, okay. All right. Welcome back.
Yeah. If you are a leader, let's say you want now to change people who always come to office and go at the right time from office and communicate it and show it by example. That's what I call exposing things. But you can also create environments where people see that what they think is impossible is actually possible.
Wow.
Because some people actually internalize it and sincerely think that this thing can't be done otherwise. Now, if you put them in an environment where at changing mindsets of people, and this is one of the powers of leadership. Yes, please.
Doctor, let me just interrupt you for a minute. You keep breaking up a lot, and I think that perhaps if you take off your video camera, we would have at least the audio to be more stable. Yes, thank you.
Is that okay?
Yes, that's better.
Yeah. So I think I have belabored to bring out the example, putting people in a different environment, and leaders demonstrating what they want. You cannot be corrupt and at the same time you discourage others from being corrupt. It can't work.
Yes, indeed. It's do as I say, not as I do.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you so much. Now we have a question from Josiah Lomote. I don't know that you can answer all the questions, but at least we'll get to as many as possible. Josiah Lomote says, one challenge with innovation and its management in our public sector service is that often innovation is imposed from top management with the implementers.
You have broken off.
Oh, okay. So let me start.
I didn't hear the question.
Okay, it's still, he hasn't put a question in yet. It says one challenge with innovation and its management in our public sector service is that often innovation is imposed from top management with implementers, public and civil servants delineated from it. Or sometimes the decision to even induce or introduce such innovations are not born from a genuine desire to better society, other than some personal interest. And so in the end, they are ineffective or poorly implemented and monitored. I think it's just a comment. And then Professor Rose Namara says, but the Sankaras, the Nyereres are individual strategists. Yes, they worked with people to implement their ideas, but these were great thinkers and had clear pathways to change. I think she's talking to the issue of transformational leaders. Our leaders need to be visionary as well. And I think you touched upon that, Professor Kauzia.
Yes. Innovations imposed from above are very difficult to implement. That's a very correct observation. One of the reasons, moreover, why, or rather we understood, but we didn't like it. Yes, the Sankaras, the Nyereres, the Kenyattas, they were individual strategists, but they developed themselves. They did not believe and organize people and develop themselves. That's the difference.
Okay. Thank you so very much. Does anybody else have any other questions that they want to lift their hands and ask the good doctor to address? But before that, let me recognize the presence of the president of the Salt University College, Dr. Ambassador Alabo. He's with us, and some faculty members. I see Dr. Mauli Kopi as well, and Ambassador Novishi as well on the attendance. Welcome and thank you for joining us. Is there any other question? Somebody says, here is one question. Should innovation always be new? What about adopting old models that seem to work?
Because I think I thought that the talk was going to be long. Can be new, but found as an innovation that helped the country sort out the problem of the numerous prisoners that came out of the act of genocide. Up to now, they would not even have judged even a quarter or even a third. But using an old system, or traditional system of sorting out conflicts of that nature, they managed to sort out the problem and created a community where people can live together, including those who had killed. So you are right, it does not necessarily have to be absolutely new, but it can be seen to be new in the circumstances. I mean, when it was an old one. So that's an example. You are right, your observation is right.
Thank you so much. Here is another comment or a question from Pamela Nsubuga Namisanyu. Apologize if I butchered your name. But Ms. Pamela is asking, in fostering a culture of innovation, how can leaders empower teams to experiment and take risks while still maintaining some level of structure to ensure accountability?
I don't think I have heard the question.
Okay. Okay, so let me ask it again. In fostering a culture of innovation, how can leaders empower teams to experiment and take risks while still maintaining some level of structure to ensure accountability and project completion? Dr. Kauzia?
That is working in teams. That's first and foremost.
Yes.
Second, you know, that question has got a budgetary trap because government budgets don't like, you don't say we set out to do this, but we didn't do it, but then we spent the money. Most government budgets don't accept that logic in public finance. But you have to design an institutional framework that accepts a different way of accountability.
Okay. Wow. Okay, here is one more question, Dr. Kauzia. Thank you for that answer. It says, how do we propagate?
I mean, most of, if you see these countries which go to the moon, they spend a lot of money, but what do they get from the moon? It's because they accepted that you go out to do this, maybe you will get it, maybe you will not get it. And then you have got a mechanism of accounting that says we set out to do this, we did it, but the results are not what we accepted. If someone says then we penalize you, then that one is killing innovation. If someone says, well, try next time, that one is encouraging innovation.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Does anyone want to actually verbalize their question? There's still some questions on the chat. If anyone wants to verbalize a question that they have using their own voice, they can go ahead. Otherwise, I will go ahead and read one more question from Savia Magwanya.
Chair, can I contribute something, please?
Sure, please go ahead. Identify yourself, please.
My name is Tabitha. She's here from Masinde Muliro University of Science and Technology, Kenya.
Okay.
First,
Welcome.
I want to appreciate Prof for that insight discussion and presentation to us. It is actually really encouraging that we need those strong leaders. And I just wanted to contribute and make an additional statement on what he just said, that this one-man show is what is making people leave offices and go with ideas. And again, my additional point is, being a one-man show is why, that is the major reason why there's no successional strategies in organizations, because somebody doesn't want to train somebody who can be able to take over when he leaves, so that when he's going with all the information. That is my own contribution. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you so very much, Tabitha, for that submission.
Another contribution. My name is Emmanuel Chega, Salt University College.
Welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Kauzia. Very innovative, very challenging, and very deeply reflective you brought. I would like to get your comment on this. You spoke about values. When you take a coin has two sides. One side gives the value, and the other side gives the identity. So if it's a Ghana currency, you will have the coat of arms on the other side. That's what gives the identity. And then the other side may have a cocoa, which will give you 20%. So you must necessarily have the identity and the value to make the coin to be legal and tender. You spoke to me about values, and you spoke about diversity. Is it right for me to think that diversity must be linked up with identity?
You have broken off.
Because when you talk of strong leaders or talk of people who can submit themselves to this thing,
Excuse me, he said you have broken off. Can you just go back to two sentences?
I was saying that a coin to be legal tender must have two sides. One side, you have the value of the coin written on that side. The other side has the identity of the country on which that coin is from. So you have identity on one side and the value on the other side. That's what makes the coin to be legal and tender. Legal in the country and tender for business because of the value. And my point is this: in mentioning diversity and in talking about strong leadership, can we say that the question of identity becomes critical? Because when you know your identity, then you can be a strong leader, but at the same time can be strong institutions and submit yourself to it.
I think that's a very deep question.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can I contribute from Uganda?
Rajab, can we allow Dr. Kauzia to address that very quickly?
Right.
The question of identity, I think over a long period of time, we somehow were subjected to this view that diversity is negative for Africa. While for me, I'm saying no. Diversity is part of the heritage and wealth of Africa, and we have got to accept it and value it. Okay? Now, if you subject it to leadership, as you said, then there is room for us, especially as scholars, to study identity setups in Africa instead of condemning chiefs, condemning kings, condemning this just in the name of white. Sometimes even in values, there is a common sense. Yes, please.
Doctor, you keep breaking up, even though.
So that whether we have a king in Morocco or where, that's their leadership choice, and they can still lead the country and develop. And then those who have got democracies can have democracies, and then they develop. But the values must be correct.
Okay, thank you so much. I have 3 hands up. I see Dr. Fatima Labo, I see Rajab, and I see James. Can I beg the gentleman to let the lady go first, and then you come in? Dr. Fatima, you have the floor. Hello? Okay, so Rajab, you can go ahead and make your comment, please.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Prof, for the presentation. My name is Rajab from Uganda, and I am the president of the Young Professionals of APAM.
Okay.
Prof, I would love to have a comment from you on innovative minds of some of our young administrators and managers vis-a-vis bureaucracy. I have experienced personally some people running away. Yes, I'm saying I have experienced people running away from government or from civil service, saying that perhaps rigid, it is bureaucratic. So my question is, how can we marry innovations of young people with bureaucracy without actually doing away with bureaucracy, like you said? What is that meeting point where innovation of young people and the new ways of doing things can be done so that we have the new generation, we have the young people on board without losing young talent? Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, Rajab.
The problem is that I didn't hear the entire question. I can get where Rajab is coming from.
The gist of it was that how can we harness the innovation of young people who basically refuse to enter the public sector because they think it's a bit rigid? How can we harness or attract young people and harness their innovation for the public sector?
I think what is happening in African countries is a good thing is that we have got an increasingly big pool of young people coming through the education system. And I think the way we select the ones that join the public service is going to matter a lot. I don't know, Rajab, whether you know this. In the old times, people who were the best brains in universities joined the public service, and then the others went into the private sector. But that has changed. There has to be a deliberate effort to attract good brains from universities. The good thing now is that in every country, a number of graduates from universities have increased, so the catchment area is bigger. But still, I think the way we attract them matters a lot. We have got to demonstrate that the public service is a worthwhile profession, so that we attract the best.
Thank you so much. Dr. Fatima?
Yes,
Go
please.
ahead.
Thank
Sorry
you.
about that. Yes, go ahead.
No, it's okay. It's okay. Good evening, and thank you, Prof. Doctor, for such insightful presentation. I don't have a question. I just want to put some dots on the I concerning the give us our daily bread from the Lord prayer. That's what just I want to put that one into perspective. That prayer, we acknowledge that our reliance on God for provision in the present moment. And it emphasizes the importance of trusting in God's provisions for our immediate needs rather than worrying excessively about the future. However, it doesn't necessarily imply a lack of readiness for the future. Instead, it encourages to focus on living faithfully and responsibly in the present while we are trusting in God's guidance and provision for both today and tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Fatima. And by the way, Dr. Fatima is our, I believe the title is
Vice President.
Vice President of of the university, the Salts University College. Thank you so much for putting that, dotting that I and crossing that T. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Can I proceed?
Sure. James, go ahead.
Thank you. I sent a text in the chat. I am James. As you heard, Professor Kayuja introduced me. I'm from Uganda and the Deputy President of the Africa Public Sector HR Managers Network. I have listened to Dr. Kayuja and read some of his work. And I'm now here perturbed. I'm really, really disturbed that what we need is value-based leadership, value-based everything. Now, how do we generate these values? Because he asked very difficult questions. Say, do we talk about difficult leaders? Where do they come from? They are coming from our society. Our society is increasingly becoming whatever it is becoming. It means we are going to have a cycle of people. Society is pushing policemen into the public service who believe that a thief should be beaten up and not arrested, so that even when a thief is arrested, they will still beat them. Even when someone is put in the cell, is already real arrested, but they will still beat them because that's what society says. They kill that thief. Now, I know we need the values, and every institution has values well documented, well publicized. But how do we get these values from paper and put them in our hearts? Yet the society is bringing all kinds of things. Otherwise, I am a very public admirer of Professor. It is so proud to be from Uganda, just as yourself. I think Ghanaians, you can see what Uganda can offer. I thank you.
Absolutely.
How do we generate values? The good thing is that you are the Vice President of the Africa Public Sector Human Resource Managers. So that question, the human resource managers need to to put your heads together and find a way of answering it. For me, I hid behind what already exists. When you read the 23rd Agenda for Sustainable Development, there is a whole list of values which seem to say, even if we are pursuing the Sustainable Development Goals, we cannot achieve them if we don't promote these values in our society. If you have a society living in equity, will remain behind. It's as they say, it goes without saying. So while it might sound difficult, I think the beginning point is to accept it, that it is necessary.
Okay.
And as I said, I do not believe that Africa is not, because there is proof that it had before been transformed, and we can transform it again. Someone who has a you see, that's the introduction of Christian values in Africa. It was a meticulous, systematic process of changing the African society. So we can also do it. As long as we have grown the values we want to push for. And as long as we systematically continue saying this,
Dr. Kauzia, we lost you. Hello?
I can hear you, but it looks like you can't hear me.
Yes, you keep going in and out. And I have to, if you're done answering that question, let me just say that we've been at this for 2 hours almost. And I would like to give the opportunity, if you permit me, to ask Savia. I think there's somebody called Savia who has raised their hand. Go ahead and ask your question. And then we would proceed to close, because this is such a meaty discussion that people are clamoring with so many questions. Savia, you have the floor. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Finally, you had started reading my question, but I think we got some interruptions. But I want to thank Professor Kauzia. It's always great to listen to him. My question was about allowing for leadership to permeate all levels without necessarily having to look at the top to say that's where leadership comes from, the integrated leadership system. And my question was, how do we propagate this in institutions, in countries where leadership at the very top feels or has demonstrated that if you allow leadership to permeate levels below them or below the top leadership, that could prove to be a threat to the level of influence and power that is held at the top leadership. And subsequently, whatever structures or efforts that are in place to seemingly indicate there is leadership at those other levels, they are really mediocre and they are not given the support and the strength to allow them to actually impact communities. So how do we get to have that balance and have leadership that actually truly believes in allowing for that permeation to happen? I think for me, I see that as a very big challenge. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Savia.
Yes, you are right.
Go ahead, please.
One way of sorting it out is this. As I said, many people tend to take leadership only in the state. But think about this. If you have an influence on a group, you're already a leader. You don't have to be a prime minister or a parliamentarian or a president. If you are a teacher in a secondary school and you have influence with the students, you are already a leader. You can actually have a bigger influence in that school and in that area than the president of the country can have. If you are a thinker who has got the capacity to externalize, you already have an influence and you can take yourself as a leader. So if we perceive leadership like that, then we will understand that it is futile to think of leadership only in terms of presidents and prime ministers and parliamentarians.
Okay. Thank you so very much, Doc.
That's exactly what I mean. Believe me, Savio, you are a leader.
Thank you so much. So that is, I have to say, Dr. Kawusia, this has been one of the more optimistic talks on Africa that I've heard in a long time. I particularly enjoyed the notion that, you know, African countries are innovating anyway, and that public sector also has been innovating in terms of the findings that you shared with us. And I would like you to give us just your closing remarks to wrap everything up. And then we would go to the closing prayer that would be done by Reverend Jehoiada Amuzu. So Dr. Kawusia, you have the floor. Thank you so very much for such a rich presentation. We really learned a lot. We really got a lot out of it. And we look forward to, you know, future collaborations and talks from you. Yes. So please go ahead and thank everybody else who joined, especially the people who joined from outside Ghana. Thank you. I know they are your followers and they are very faithful followers. We have become followers ourselves, Dr. Kawusia. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I was saying thank you for leading us through this discussion. Talking of leadership, there goes an example. I would like really to say thank you to the university. And in saying this, I want to say that I am one of those who are actively advocating for the unity of Africa. We're very quickly creating Africa as one country. And sometimes we don't see certain positive things coming within the larger picture. If you see how many people came from different corners, different countries of Africa to join in this discussion, then now you can begin to see that a university like Salt University College is already in a leadership position in terms of bringing Africa together. Because I don't think there is a bigger togetherness than coming together to think about a specific issue that is concerning the larger society. So I really thank you very much. And I have been very encouraged to see many public servants from different countries, from different universities, joining in this discussion. I cannot take it lightly because it falls exactly within my dream of bringing Africa to think together, rather than always waiting to see what has come from the meeting of the heads of state in Addis Ababa. I think such discussion is a big contribution to the unity of Africa. I thank you very much.
Thank you so very much. And we look forward to more shared ideas in the future. Reverend Jehoiada, you have the floor. Please go ahead and close us.
Let us pray. Almighty God, we thank you so much for a successful lecture, inspiring us, Lord, to consider how to reinvent Africa's leadership structure for sustainable development. We thank you for using Dr. John Mary Hosea to lead us and to grant us more insight into the way forward for sustainable development. We thank you for the South University College, the management, the faculty, and the organizing committee that put this together. We thank you for all participants. We thank you for all the students of South University College. And we pray that all that, Lord, you have shared with us through your servant will be applied, so we all collaborate to ensure that Africa really experience sustainable development, for giving Africa a gift of diversity, help us to cherish it as a heritage and to leverage it for our accelerated development. Thank you, and trust that the guest series that are ahead of us will be even more instructive and more enlightening. Lord of glory, praise and honor, word without end. Through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. And thank you all for coming, and have a good evening. Dr. Kauzia, have a good afternoon, because I know you're in the US. And all of you who are already in Uganda, you are far into your night. Thank you so much for joining us. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.